moment is here. Election night in the Arklamis, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
It's important. Everybody needs to get out and let their voice be heard.
You, the voters, determined to make a difference, stood in long lines to cast your ballot early.
God bless America, ma'am.
And today, some of you want a change in power.
I'm looking for change, and I'm excited about change.
Some of you want your elected leaders to stay.
We're going to do our best to do everything we can to get Donald Trump elected back in office.
No matter who walks away with a win, you, the voters, stepped up to be part of democracy.
I am so blessed that I have the right to vote.
Now the time is here. See how your vote will make a difference, as the real power is in your hands. Election night in the Arklamis starts right now. Your local election headquarters. This is NBC 10 News. The 2020 presidential election. Sponsored by Creed & Creed, your local injury attorneys.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bodie Brooks. Joining me this evening is political science professor from ULM, Dr. John Sutherland, and State Representative Michael Echols. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me for special election coverage this momentous election day. A lot is happening. In fact, just moments ago, the polls closed in Arkansas. In 30 minutes, the polls will close in Louisiana. And already we've started to see results pour in from all across the nation. Before we start pouring into the local races, gentlemen, let's start with the president's race, which is top of many people's minds this evening. As I was mentioning just before we got started, I've been running around so much for the past hour and a half since our most recent newscast that I've not been paying too close attention to the electoral map that's coming in. But as it stands right now, what I'm looking at, Joe Biden currently is projected with 85 electoral votes, Donald Trump with 61. This data coming from the Associated Press. And so far, the states where where both candidates seem to be carrying electoral votes, there's no real big surprises just yet in the evening. Would y'all disagree with me?
I would agree completely that based on some of the maps that I'm seeing and some of the data I'm seeing, everything is as it is expected to be with some of the states that are coming in. I think we get 30 minutes from now when you see that data dump, and maybe there'll be a surprise or two, but right now everything's as expected.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the surprise so far is that there's no real surprises.
That's it.
I mean, this is, as we say, according to Hoyle.
Not surprising.
I mean, one thing though, and Michael and I were talking about it off air about this, was that there was some indication by some pundits, some pollsters about the fate of Kentucky.
Yeah.
And
Well, Mitch McConnell, I mean, the leader of the Senate, there was an early pontification that he may lose his seat. They're already projecting him as winner.
Yeah. And the polls have just barely closed, and they're able to make that projection. And so, if this is any indication of how, the unbiased polling has taken place, this could be a lot longer night for everybody, us included. But the idea, though, again, that Kentucky would be in play seems to run counter to what we're actually seeing in terms of turnout.
Well, was there any real polling that even suggested that Kentucky would have been in play? I'm not sure if I saw any.
I mean, most of what I saw said that Kentucky was a either toss-up or in play.
Absolutely.
And the idea that certainly Mitch McConnell, there are people within the Republican Party even that are not big Mitch fans, but the idea that somehow you're going to lose that position of power, you've really got to have a compelling narrative to do that. And I don't think there was anything out there for that.
And I know the listening or the viewing audience is Arkansas as well, and they're projecting now Trump will win Arkansas, which is a huge surprise, right?
Yeah, I mean, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, certainly very much in the Trump camp, I think. But I do think that there were some ballot initiatives that were put on to maximize turnout.
Yeah.
I mean, there were clearly other issues at play on that, but no doubt some ballot initiatives that demanded that certain people would continue to turn out in support of in this case, Trump. Obviously, the thing that we'll be looking forward to is the North Carolina, and then, of course, I think Florida will know, but I don't think we'll know exactly at 8, but Florida. What I was surprised about, and you probably did too, Mike, was the Virginia just closed, and you know, all polling indicated that Trump was ahead there, but they were still willing to call Virginia for
59.
I noticed that, yeah.
40% of the vote in.
I have some friends on Facebook who are even taking snapshots of why are they calling the race for Biden in Virginia right now. Perhaps you can explain a little bit how the polling plays into that and how the decision desks make their calls. What experience you all have?
Well, I was told when I came on the show there wouldn't be any math. And,
Not trying to go too deep into it. Don't want to bore anybody.
I can't even use Common Core math to make this make sense. No, what you do is you look at historic trends, and you know that in urban settings, particularly in large population centers, if you go back 4 years ago, Clinton was able to carry, I think, 78, 80 of the largest population centers, and the idea is that Biden would continue that trend. And so based upon historic numbers, the problem with that is that it doesn't take into account the voter turnout and where that voter turnout is coming from. So if you've got some people, say outside of Fredericksburg, that may be voting for Trump versus Arlington, which is a suburb of DC for Arlington, you may see historic numbers that don't match up with this. So I'm always a little hesitant when I start seeing this over projection.
Well, and some of it too, the impacts of calling races on the East Coast and the ripple effect back across the West Coast. You get into states like Arizona, which could be in play, and then other states. California, obviously not in play in this scenario, but there's some states with that news on the East Coast popping up could influence and suppress some voters at the end of the day.
Imagine you're in line and you're staring at, say, an hour and 45 minutes, and you're going to be in line and you hear, oh, Virginia is now being able to be called, or something else. I mean, I'm young enough to remember the, George W. and Al Gore race where things were called and then pulled back off and then called, and come 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, we were still no closer to a resolution. So I've always been against the idea, and this is a type of voter suppression, if you want to say, hey, look, maybe we should wait till all the polls are closed, or a preponderance of the polls, because clearly, as you said, if I'm in line and, outside of, Phoenix, and I'm saying, well, heck, the race is called. Maybe I don't stay in line as much. So.
You could make that case. However, I do want to raise the issue of voter turnout, because this year it's unlike anything we've ever seen before. In the states of Louisiana and Arkansas alone, let's just talk about early voting. All I have in front of me is the early voting numbers, not the absentee ballots, but those were substantial as well, partly due to the pandemic, but also just because of the great amount of national interest in this race. In Louisiana, we almost hit 1 million early votes, 964,000 roughly. That's an 80% increase from the early vote in 2016 and represents about 31.7% of registered voters. And even our own Secretary of State predicting that the state will surpass 70% turnout between early and day of voters. In Arkansas, the Monday morning before today, there were 741,155 people that had voted early in Arkansas, and compared to 2016, it was 544,450. So you've seen a big bump in Louisiana, in Arkansas, and I can't name a state where you did not see a bump in early voting. When you have such a huge amount of turnout, how do you even predict or poll or get any sort of statistic?
So this is 100% the Trump effect. You go back, Biden was on a ticket several years ago. Turnout not nearly like this. So obviously you've got this anomaly in Donald Trump that is causing massive interest at the polls, good or bad, it's just causing massive interest at the polls. So I think you're going to have outcomes like you've never seen before because of all this uncertainty and the anomaly.
Yeah, and the turnout phenomenon, it's interesting. Will the shift be where the early voting, whether absentee or mail-in ballots, will people still turn out and vote in the record numbers so that we continue to see it? Or is this merely as they say, the new norm, a substitution for
the new average?
Yeah, and so, I mean, obviously, you want more people to participate in this process, but what is unclear is whether or not, is this all COVID related, or is there something else? I would certainly say that a big part of the absentee and early voting you would have to say that it's COVID related.
Sure.
But is it something that is going to stay with us long term? No way to know that, really.
I don't disagree with you guys at all. I'm trying to look at some of the returns we're getting now in Arkansas, see if there's anything jumping out or surprising us. Remember, we mentioned earlier in the night, you have the presidential race, of course, but also you got a Senate race, and we have a local congressional race. And I'm looking at already no major surprises. Now, the Arkansas race, unique in the sense that you didn't have any major challenger. You had incumbent Senator Tom Cotton hoping for a second term. He was facing a challenge from a Libertarian candidate, Ricky Dale Harrington. And like I mentioned earlier in our newscast, you didn't have a debate for Senate here in the state of Louisiana between any of those candidates. There wasn't a debate in Arkansas either. And I believe Tom Cotton pulled out of that, basically saying, we didn't have any sort of major challenger. He didn't see the Libertarian candidate as a major challenge. Also for Congressional District 4, Representative Bruce Westerman leading with 62.17% of the vote, and that's with very little current returns, but that was also a district that was seen as strongly Republican, so he's most likely to be reelected.
And so you're seeing in Arkansas, of course, there's 6 electoral votes there. They're already calling it for Trump, which is pretty obvious. Most of the southern states probably will move in that direction. But you're right with Tom Cotton and some of the other congressional candidates. There just really weren't meaningful races or meaningful candidates that were potentially going to challenge them.
What is kind of interesting to me, too, on this is that, in a year where there was some, at least initially, some general dissatisfaction towards the major parties on this, that you really didn't see the Libertarians position themselves better to take advantage of this. I think, it's very hard to run as a third party in this country. I mean, in modern times, you only have a couple of examples of third parties doing respectively. But it does seem like a missed opportunity because Libertarians, we often talk about them being that in-between area between Democrats and Republicans. You can attract, some socially progressive, fiscally responsible people that may not be comfortable with certain issues. But what you found is that overall the Libertarians, just another one of these sort of missed opportunities for them in terms of positioning themselves for a better, more consistent role, either nationally or within certain states.
Most people I've spoken with seem to treat the Libertarian Party as a place to park their vote instead of actually, going out and actively supporting that candidate. They look at it as, I'm going to choose a lesser of technically 3 evils. This election go round, I was interested as well to see that you didn't have a very prominent presence from the Libertarian candidate Joe Jorgensen. Compare that to 4 years ago, there were many people who knew there was a third-party candidate, Gary Johnson. That may have been because he had that major Aleppo moment and put himself out there in that respect. But with this particular candidate, Jorgensen, I'm curious, is it on her campaign for not being very visible, or is it on folks like us in the media? Which I preface that by saying that our own station did interview Jorgensen this go round. So why she couldn't really grab people, I'm curious what effect might have happened there.
I mean, I think this is, every 4 years we talk about this being a historical election, and to be fair, every time we elect a president,
they're historical.
They're historical. But in terms of, say, the grassroots effort, the get out the vote, the GOTV effort of the Libertarians, just simply raising money. This was a campaign season unlike anything else. However, when you look at the total amount of money spent on the presidential level, it was way more than what we saw the last 2 cycles. So,
$6-some-odd billion.
Yeah, I mean, it was
huge money.
Huge monies. And then in some senatorial races, you see $100 million being spent. Mm-hmm. And so, you don't want to say, well, Libertarians couldn't compete money-wise. They couldn't compete money-wise, though. I mean, at the end of the day, they were not able to tap into that base that either Democrats or Republicans enjoy. And I'm not saying it's the end-all for them, but Jorgensen just, compared to Johnson, just did not have it. I will say this, the caveat to me in looking at a third party has been this. in those states that were within that 1 or 2 points last time around, the defection of libertarians and Green Party people, okay? Because the same thing, if libertarians is the third party, Green Party's got to be fourth, fifth, sixth, something like that. Where do those people go? And I think Green Party people naturally gravitate to the Democrats. Libertarians, on the other hand, I think are more likely for fiscal matters to go with the Republicans. But on some of the social issues for some of the northern states, could they break sharply for Democrats? And there has been very little, say, polling done among those who prefer third-party candidates.
I mean, traditionally, they're treated like independents or as an independent voter, which is very different from a libertarian voter, I would. Yeah.
And it's not monolithic. It's not just one sort of third-party thing that exists. I mean, you go down there and you look. I mean, I don't want to step on your thing about being a Kanye West supporter, which, by the way, he ran on the birthday party. Did you see?
That was interesting. There was also
really
a President Bodie who
I
ran.
haven't seen a lot of numbers. I'll admit I didn't do my homework properly and didn't investigate the Kanye number. But the thing that's interesting to me about Kanye's numbers is the places where Kanye is likely to pull any significant vote whatsoever seems to be the places that Trump did very well last time. And Trump and Kanye have a relationship.
So is Kanye even on the ballot in Florida? There were some states he didn't make the cut on, I believe.
He did make it in ours, and I think since we've gotten to the point where we're talking about Kanye West in the presidential race, maybe it's time we start.
The show has gone off the rails.
We need to start looking at maybe some of these down ballot races, and we'll start with the Senate race here in the state of Louisiana. So Bill Cassidy looking to gain a second term in the Senate. He's facing 14 different challengers. You have one other Republican challenging him, you have 5 Democrats, 1 Libertarian, and you have 7 independents. Now, it's very possible that you could see Bill Cassidy walk away still with this seat by the end of the night. What are the odds there may be a runoff?
I would say they're lower than, I mean, obviously he's got a really good support base in Louisiana, both in the Republican side, and the Republican side is what will win it for him. But he just didn't have an extraordinarily strong challenger at this point. And if there was a runoff, then I would say it's still probably Senator Cassidy by a large margin. But again, it's politics; anything could happen.
And I think the thing too with Cassidy on this is that Cassidy is not seen as someone who is partisan at the expense of his state's interests. I think what you find with Cassidy is that he is very appealing to independents, a lot of moderate or conservative Democrats. He's got a very good relationship with Governor Edwards, and part of it you should. I mean, there's a lot of issues in a state like Louisiana where we have so many health care disparities and needs. There needs to be a consensus built between the parties to come up with a solution. And I think I haven't seen anything presented by any candidate in this race that says they have a solution ready day one to put forward. But I do agree with you. I think Shreveport Mayor Perkins, if there was going to be a challenge, say come December, that's the most likely place it would be. But I can't see Cassidy losing.
When you look at the money too, I mean, he had a couple of million. Perkins, a couple $1 million put up, mostly party-related dollars. Yeah. Cassidy is a very good fundraiser. Yeah. Multiple millions of dollars have been raised. But too, it goes back to your comments about across the aisle. Cassidy has worked with numerous other senators across the aisle to come up with bipartisan legislation. And I think that is really, when you're out trying to message that he's ex or affiliated with the president, when he's working across the aisle at the same time, it makes it difficult to create those arguments.
I think too, and I've said this before, I think people who sort of cut their teeth politically in a state legislative body understand that potholes, lights, public schools, those aren't partisan issues, okay? And at some point, you don't get to go back to your home base and say, hey, I stuck on principle and you're just going to have potholes from here to whodunit. Well, it just doesn't work that way. And I think his years as a state senator, he was very well respected. Cassidy was known as being a person who could bridge the divide, work with people. And I think that has served him well in the Senate.
One of the last things I spoke to Senator Cassidy about was while he was trying to push legislation about ending surprise medical costs. Healthcare, additionally with Cassidy's history as being a medical doctor, I would imagine is quite central to both his campaign, his platform. Whenever I interviewed Mayor Perkins, he also wanted to focus on healthcare as a key part of his campaign, and he also said that was why he decided to join the race as late as he did. Why healthcare? Why is that such a big issue in Louisiana?
So Senator Cassidy's been a big advocate, and it's surprise medical billing is one of the challenges that we face. You know, you have a medical emergency, then you end up getting a bill months later for $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, and so that's something he's been advocating for some time. And because he's been very prolific about advocating for that, patients, he was huge when Hurricane Katrina hit, setting up hospitals and medical facilities in New Orleans. I mean, he's a medical doctor. He's done things for Medicaid populations. It's something that he knows about. And so for another guy to come in and try to take the mantle from something that the gentleman's been doing for decades, it's a really tough pitch for the voter to believe that how is a medical doctor no less than another guy that's just been in office for a year?
I think it's an excellent point, too, that again, Cassidy's expertise in the healthcare sector, I'm not going to say it's unmatched, but it's very hard statewide and certainly across the country to find someone who doesn't have as intimate knowledge of the sector as he does. I think the direction Perkins could have gone is basically a whole lot of other things.
Sure.
You know, he could have focused on some of the economic development, some of the job creation, some of the attraction of, say, investors coming to Shreveport, you know, as the mayor. However, this is the interesting thing about it. The skills that Perkins has as a mayor are not necessarily the ones that translate into being a senator. And I think that it helps explain why Perkins' main focus has just primarily been an attack on Cassidy and never really putting forward a positive message of, okay, if I am this is what I would do.
So I'm not sensing any sort of disagreement here over how the Senate race may end up looking by the end of the night. We'll get a better picture in just about 6 minutes or so. So while we wait for that, let's move on to the next local race that's going to be creating a lot of discussion, which is in the 5th Congressional District. Well-known Republican Ralph Abraham, he ran for governor last year. He's retiring at the end of his term, and now you have 9 candidates altogether competing for the seat, 5 Republicans, 4 Democrats. You have Candy Kristoff, Jesse Lagarde, Martin Lamel, Philip Snowden, Alan Guillory Sr., Lance Harris, Matt Hasty, Luke Letlow, and Scotty Robinson. This could be anybody's seat. Now, from what I've researched about some of these candidates, some of them have put themselves a lot more out there than others. In fact, there were some with social media presences that were quite smaller than my own. So yeah, I would argue if you're not putting yourself well enough out there for people to really be seeing you, then I don't think you're doing that good of a job. But there are some that are, and that is still keeping this race quite wide, or the pool of candidates quite wide. What do you make of what's going on?
Let you jump in, Doc.
You know, this is an interesting race. I think it could be one where the top 2 candidates could be a few thousand votes ahead of, say, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. But with 3rd, 4th, and 5th place finishers,
Your local election headquarters. This is NBC 10 News. The 2020 presidential election. Sponsored by Creed & Creed, your local injury attorneys.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Bodie Brooks. You're watching special coverage of election night right here on NBC 10. The polls closing in just moments here in Louisiana and just about 30 minutes ago in Arkansas. Already the state of Arkansas being projected for President Trump, and you're also seeing the Senate seat that was up for grabs in Arkansas being quite well defended tonight by incumbent Senator Tom Cotton. The one congressional district in our viewing area that we're watching tonight in Arkansas, District 4, incumbent Representative Bruce Westerman holding on to a lead in this race with 70% of the vote, 70% support of the vote currently being reported. Right now, still not seeing anything for the state of Louisiana. As far as the presidential race or some of these down ballot races, we have been discussing on our digital channel on myarklamiss.com many of these races, some of the factors about them, you know, the ins and outs and what you really need to know All right, and I'm just learning. We are getting some numbers from Arkansas on the president. As I said before, President Trump carrying the state of Arkansas quite handily with only 14% of the vote in. The race being called already for President Trump in Arkansas. No major surprise there. Currently 56% support of the vote. Joe Biden with 42%, and you have some of our I wouldn't necessarily say lesser known candidates, but down ballot candidates getting some support. You got about 1% of the vote for Joe Jorgensen, and even Kanye West carrying just under 1,000 votes. We're expecting to get a lot more of the results just pouring in moments. You can keep it right here on NBC 10 or jump on over to myarklamiss.com where coverage will continue on our digital channel. I'm Bodie Brooks. We'll send things back to programming. All right, welcome back. If you're watching our digital coverage of election night on myarklamiss.com, we had to step aside for just a moment and make an update for television. Before we stepped away, we were talking about the race for Congress in the 5th District of Louisiana. Quite a lot of candidates, and y'all were talking about how we could very easily see this race end up with a runoff between two Republican candidates.
It's very possible. If you didn't really see a massive distinguishing in the Democratic pool of candidates, and even if you're just watching media or social media, there was never a big push. So there's a chance that you could see two of the leading Democratic candidates come in at, say, 15 and 15%, splitting up the majority vote, and then two Republicans coming in at 23 and 25%. That carry this into an R versus R runoff, which would be a very interesting scenario.
Be very interesting. I would, you know, family disputes are always the worst.
They can get quite ugly.
And I think that you're likely to see a very heated, spirited contest if it turns out to be two Republicans. I think if you're looking at this, I mean, historically, this race shapes up a lot like the 2014 race to me. But in that race, Democrats consolidated behind then Mayor Mayo, and he was the ticket leader coming into it. However, but because of the way the district is, it doesn't really set up well for a Democrat, unless a very conservative Democrat.
Sure.
I think would be competitive. However, this is very much a pro-Trump, you know, district. This is very much a district that has been impacted by floods, storms, needs help from the federal government, but also a pull ourselves up by our bootstrap kind of district as well. District 5 is a very complex district. When people say, oh, this is an agricultural district, I think it's much more nuanced than that.
Well, so I mean, it goes from Baton Rouge essentially all the way up to the Arkansas line.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, it's a very large district.
Yep. And then it cuts over to include the Florida parishes. And you know, for those who have never traveled to the Florida parishes, they are unlike other parts of the state. I mean, they were the part that was governed by the Spanish long after the Spanish had left other parts of the state. They are If you've never seen the way local politics is done, it's a very different process in the Florida parishes. I think for 36 days they were an independent country, so you know, not quite as long as the free state of Eccles, but somehow they retained a bit of that, and I think it's a complex district, but it's the price you pay when you lose 200,000 plus people, and you know, after Hurricane Katrina and then Rita, and then the districts have to be redrawn.
Now let's talk about another congressional race just right next door, the 4th district. This one seems to be a lot less competitive. You have an incumbent, Mike Johnson. He's hoping to get a second term in Congress. He's facing off only 3 other challengers, 2 Democrats, 1 Republican. What stood out to me is at least one of these challengers is somebody who ran up against Johnson back in 2018 and lost with only 33% support, and that would be Ryan Trundle. I mean, is there anything that you can really analyze with this race, or is it going to be one of those quite similar, I wouldn't say completely similar to the Senate race, but one where we're looking to see an incumbent easily win re-election?
So Congressman Johnson really distinguished himself as a constitutional conservative. He's chairman of the study caucus. He's created some leadership opportunities for himself. He's closely aligned with President Trump. When they came in to rally for different gubernatorial candidates a year or 2 ago, Mike Johnson's on stage with him. I mean, it's just the affiliation with the conservative Republican is really, I think, there's no question here.
Yeah, and I think the point about him being constitutionally conservative is an important one. It's an important distinction because it has given him the freedom in that district to align himself, I think, very, very closely with his constituents. You don't find sharp disagreements with Johnson where he's at throughout the 4th. And I would say that Johnson continues to position himself very well. There's always talk about, on the next redistricting, Shreveport, Monroe being lumped into something. In a case like that, I think Johnson has positioned himself very well to possibly make a run for a Senate spot, depending on what Kennedy decides to do. Johnson is one of those that has positioned himself, I think, very, very well. You don't see anything really negative coming out. I would hate to have to run against someone like Johnson. I mean, where do you attack him? I mean, literally, what do you attack him on? I don't know.
And he's just a nice guy.
Well, there you go.
He's been on my radio show several times, monthly almost, and he's just a nice guy.
Yep.
Easy to talk to, logical, reasonable in his approach, and it's just it'd be a tough race for anybody. So
switching gears back over to the presidential race, we've had the polls closed now in Louisiana, and already no major surprise, Louisiana being called for Donald Trump, only 1% reporting, but already Donald Trump with 53.5% support of the vote. And as we mentioned a little earlier, the state of Arkansas with 29% of the vote reporting, also being called for President Trump with 57.5% support. I want to go back to the presidential race and we talked a little bit about turnout already. I want to talk about actual candidate visits, because we saw these presidential candidates, they were making some major travel plans these last 2 weeks, but one of their stops never included Louisiana and Arkansas. Now, these are not swing states, we know this. No major presidential candidate made a campaign stop in Louisiana. The last time Trump came down here was to campaign for Eddie Rispone, and I don't think any Democrat came and visited at all during this campaign. For voters, how does that affect them whenever they're kind of being treated a little bit like, not necessarily, well, yeah, a bit like flyover states or even flyover voters?
Well, I wouldn't think that President Trump has done a flyover in Louisiana. He's been here 5 or 6 times just in the last 4 years. Some of that was to campaign in the gubernatorial race, but doing whether it's a flyover or stop in post-hurricane, I think Hurricane Laura, he was in for a fundraiser in Lake Charles just some months ago. Vice President Pence has been here. So I think it's an important state to him because it's an oil and gas state that fits as oil and gas and growing jobs and growing the American economy through our natural resources. So I think it's important from a messaging standpoint. Now, Joe Biden, I don't know if he's ever been to Louisiana, if he knows where it is on the map, but again, it's I think you've seen more attention from the current administration in Louisiana, even to the point where they're giving a declaration 100% reimbursement for debris removal and things of that nature. So it's on his mind. He's got great relationships with Senator Cassidy, most of the legislative delegation. I would say it's an important state, Louisiana. Arkansas, I can't really speak to that.
You know, the issue too is in any campaign, like you would for any competitive process, you've got a limited amount of time and a limited amount of resources. If you know that you're 15 points up, you know, you're not going to go back and just sort of hammer that, and you know, unless you're just hemorrhaging votes. And so it makes sense that over the last, say, 4 to 5 days, and this is true really for both Biden and Trump, you know, go to the places that are still sort of on the fence. LBJ used to talk about, you know, it was worth 5,000 to 15,000 votes every time Air Force One landed someplace. And I think there's something to be said for it. I mean, look, at the end of the day, people are not as partisan on an individual basis as we would like to think of them as, you know. And so there are people that will, you know, if you saw Biden personally or you saw Trump, they can be swayed by that. And so you're going to see, you know, what we've seen, these candidates go to those places that remain competitive in an effort to sway voters. Biden could buy a camp in Hot Springs and it would not sway a single vote there, and it would waste time, effort that could have been done someplace else.
You know, one other race I want to talk about is in Florida.
Yeah.
With about 90% reporting, they have the president at 51.2% or 5.5 million votes, Biden at 47.9. That's a 400,000 vote, give or take some, deficit with 90% reporting. Broward County's in at 94%. Some of the southern counties of Florida are already in. It would shock me now with this dramatic of a spread that you could even create a contentious moment if you got 500,000 votes difference.
You know, and Florida is, again, one of those bellwether states we watch. You know, for Trump, you have to have it. Mm-hmm. For Biden, there's a little bit more flexibility. But whoever wins Florida, it becomes increasingly hard for his opponent to create scenarios where he wins out. So, yeah, that's a very important stat to watch. And
I myself, I'm looking over the electoral map trying to see if there's any discrepancies or anything jumping out that seems odd or at least noteworthy to mention. And something we've not yet talked about tonight, guys, is Texas. For one thing, the early vote turnout in Texas was astronomical, surpassed its 2016 total vote by more than 130% at my last check. I'm sure it was even more than that, and I'm not sure how many people even might have voted today. Right now, with 57% reporting, Joe Biden maintains a very, very slim lead with 3,732,918. Donald Trump with 3,696,732. So that's a difference of about 0.5% of the vote. Very small margin, and traditionally Texas would not be treated as competitive at all. What changed?
Well, if that's early vote, I lean towards the Democrats should come out of the lead out of an early vote. If you're tooth and tooth coming out of an early vote, then it means election day of, you're going to have a heavier Republican turnout. I'd lean towards the president, again, if it's neck and neck. If there's a 3 to 5% spread, then maybe a different outcome.
Yeah, and I think, too, I saw a lot of these sort of national pundits talking about Texas being in play and giving a whole, you know, cocktail of reasons for it. And it was interesting. One particular one talked about the number of people that had moved from California into Texas over the last several years. And I thought, you know, not since Moses have we seen such an exodus of people fleeing, going to a promised land. The idea that Californians who believe that, you know, the world begins and ends in Cali, moving to Texas, it's an interesting dynamic. I have not believed that Texas is in play. I think at the end of the night, what you'll find with Texas is that 3-4 points in favor of the president. You will see some places, you know, Harris County, Houston, you know, or the more liberal Travis County, where Austin is. Of course, you're going to see heavy Biden support there. But Texas, even when it was controlled by Democrats, was always a very socially conservative state. So it'd be interesting to watch that.
Another news feed in on a Senate race, Colorado. John Hickenlooper, a Democrat, projected to beat Republican Cory Gardner.
And Cory
that was a
Gardner, the
surprise.
incumbent in that race, correct? John Hickenlooper, a previous governor of that state, and I'm pretty sure Democrats, from what I read, were rather confident that they could take Colorado. Did y'all see anything different?
The only thing that I wondered about with Colorado is that you have seen Trump being able to pick up an increasingly larger number of Hispanic voters, and that's an important number, not a huge number, but an important number when you're talking about a 3 to 4 point swing. And so add to it Proposition 115, which is their, Colorado has one of the most broad abortion policies in the country, and is often a haven for people from, I think, 30 different states will go to Colorado for late-term abortions. Prop 115 is very similar to Louisiana's Amendment 1. That right there could pull more conservatives to turn out and vote. So, Colorado, I don't think anyone has discussed it being in play, and it would be hard to imagine unless there was a continued sharp break of Hispanics and a very large turnout of particularly socially conservative people in Colorado.
So we are getting some early votes from Louisiana now, which I know is an important factor here. Going to our 5th congressional district, and again, these are Secretary of State site reporting. Just in the 13 of 24 parishes reporting, and not many precincts, but Luke Letlow with 18,000 votes so far. Candy Christopher, the Democrat, at 17%. So just in that little segment, and again, it's a small segment of the population, you're seeing a Republican and a Democrat. Lance Harris polling at 3rd in this early data.
Well, and what's interesting about this to me is that, Letlow came into this, I would say, almost like the de facto incumbent.
I feel like he was campaigning a lot on name recognition.
But let's be totally fair about this. Every chief of staff for every congressional office in the history of the universe always believes they can be the congressman. Because in many ways they function and they do a lot of the things, the constituent services, answering the questions, going out, doing all that. If Letlow is able to accomplish this, he will do what I don't believe anyone has done since Reconstruction in this state, and that's go from being a chief of staff of a congressman to being the congressman. And so I think it's very, it's easy to say, oh, well, he had all this money. Yes, a lot of people have had money. I'm old enough to remember a guy named Lee Fletcher who had a bucket of money and was he was a chief of staff.
Republican running against a Democrat,
That's
lost
right.
to
lost.
yeah.
And let me tell you what, to make the transition from being chief to being congressman, that's a major accomplishment.
Tough run.
It
depends too on how you're positioned by your opponent. Some of your
Absolutely.
opponents position you like you're just this, and you don't have this experience. That hasn't happened at all in this cycle.
I think too, the willingness of former Congressman, soon to be former Congressman, Ralph Abraham, to fully embrace Luke to the point of going out, campaigning with him, helping him raise the money, position himself, and the fact that Abraham had just come out of a gubernatorial race also gave some experience there too. So look, I mean, what we're seeing right now is, he's within an eyelash of winning in the first round, and let me tell you, as we say, where I grew up cudding, that'd be a big deal.
That would be a huge deal.
Huge deal. Huge deal.
Especially with the variation with so many Republicans in the race. 2-3 Republicans, that would be...
It'd be big.
But again, we're so early in this data. We only have 14 of 24 parishes reporting early in absentee voting. There's still thousands, tens of thousands of votes that are out there.
Yeah, can't be jumping to any conclusions just yet. Earlier, just a few moments ago, you brought up a comparison between Amendment 1 and a proposition there in Colorado. We haven't done any conversation too much on some of the amendments that we're voting on, and I'll be honest with you, some of them are a little bit boring to read through. In all honesty, but the biggest one is Amendment 1. That's been perhaps the most divisive. We talked a little bit about it during our newscast and want to spend just a little bit of time here discussing it. One of the biggest things I can see from this as an outsider looking in, you have a Democrat governor in Louisiana who is very pro-life. You have this legislation that was authored by a Democrat that represents this particular area, Katrina Jackson. It is a very unique scenario to Louisiana for there to be such a strong Democrat support behind a pro-life movement here.
But without that support, in some cases, a Democrat, you don't get elected. You've got to have, pro-life, pro-gun. I mean, that just is Louisiana's fabric.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a responsible thing to be looking at these types of policies. But that's how you get elected here.
The interesting thing to me with it is that the degree to which, on the Democrat side, it is a litmus test for participating in national Democratic politics. And I think it creates a ceiling, an artificial ceiling for conservative Democrats in Louisiana who literally just don't have much room to go anyplace else. And you look at some of the historical people that have risen up in Democratic politics because of their position as being pro-life. It basically kept them from having a national presence. And so I think for State Senator Katrina Jackson, I think it's very important for her. And could it be a situation where she challenges for leadership, say even within the Black Caucus? Possibly.
So you're right now in your early voting, and again, very preliminary, looking across the state and just that litmus test, that small cross-section of what is being presented out there. In the 2nd Congressional District, Cedric Richmond, a black Democrat, right now at 51%, a Republican at 30% right behind him. Hands down, he should win that race based on the demographics of the district he represents. The 3rd Congressional District has Clay Higgins, a very outspoken lawman, a gunman, and a tough talker at 70% of the early vote, with half of the parishes reporting early and absentee. So an interesting makeup. You mentioned Mike Johnson before as well, 62% of the 4th Congressional District. Again, I think Shreveport in the western part of the state, northern western part of the state. And then back to the 5th Congressional District with Luke Lecklow still at 45%. Again, very strong numbers in that litmus test.
All right, I don't want to cut you gentlemen off too quickly. We will be having another television cut-in coming up, and you guys will be a part of it. So for our digital audience, just want to let you know we're going to be stepping away shortly. Not quite sure when we're going to have that happen. If you could let me know the time. In roughly about 10 minutes or so we still got some time to spend with you all before we're going to step away and inform our television audience about what's going on before we come back and continue our coverage here on the digital channel. We were talking about some of the results in these congressional races. I've navigating the website, so give me just a second to bear with me. I'm curious about another major eye-grabbing proposal that's on the ballot, which is the final thing, the proposition for sports betting by parish. Just kind of curious, at least how political is an issue like sports betting? Because I don't see it as being a red or blue thing. It may be a morality thing, but other than that, sports betting.
I mean, to be totally fair, I took the points on that, and I gave it a 2-to-1.
What are the odds?
I'll be honest, I'm amazed at people on these types of issues that are basically, if you don't want to bet sports, you don't have to. It's the same with a whole lot of other things. I mean, Louisiana has so many opportunities to gamble as it is.
That's true.
Probably as much as anything. This has always been my philosophical thing on this. When we're talking about economic development, gambling should be thought of as the absolute last resort. Gambling doesn't create, make, or nothing. It may generate income, but it doesn't create, say, a manufacturing base. It doesn't create, say, additional added value products. It is a thing in and of itself. However, if you've got a source of revenue that you may use for, say, infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, schools, whatever, that could be a way to tap into some of that. However, if you're against it, you just don't gamble. I mean, there's a lot of things that if it were legal, I still wouldn't do. Dieting is number one. If there was a subsidy on French fries, you might be able to count me in on that. All right? But I mean, there's just certain these, quote, sin taxes that, you know, at some point this whole sort of nanny state that we embrace, if you don't like it, don't vote for it. And you don't have to gamble. But I can tell you this, since billions of dollars are bet on Super Bowls every year, there should be some money available for local projects that we are missing the boat on. But I'll give you 2-to-1 on that.
All right. Well, because of the way that the Secretary of State website is sort of set up, it's that vote is being done on a parish by parish basis, and right now I'm not seeing very many results in for Ouachita Parish. I'll have to circle back around and check on that. But on some of these other amendments we are discussing here in the state of Louisiana, we talked earlier about Amendment 1. Right now the reporting is 69% support, and that's with roughly 33 of 64 parishes in with early and absentee voting, and about 2 out of roughly 4,000 precincts reporting, but already a very early lead for yes on Amendment 1. On Amendment 2, 56% support yes. That was the amending the determination of fair market value of oil or gas. On Amendment 3, amending the use of the Budget Stabilization Fund or the Rainy Day Fund. I believe that's what that was referred to, using the Rainy Day Fund for federally declared disasters. You're seeing support roughly about 54% in favor, 46% against. Here's where things change a little bit on Amendment 4. And again, this is all early returns, so they could change throughout the night. On Amendment 4, this was the introducing more limits on spending, supporting an amendment to limit the growth of the expenditure limit for the state general fund and dedicated funds to remove the calculation of its growth factor from the Constitution. That's a lot of words there, well, so it was a lot for people to digest, maybe.
On this one, Bodie, and certainly Representative Eccles has seen this too. You know, when you start tampering with any funding mechanism and assumptions for it, there's always going to be some backlash. I'm a bit surprised that even early on there isn't more support for 4, because there was a lot of outside of the state money put into this. I must have got 3 or 4 mailouts on this, several phone calls, texts. I thought it was somebody trying to get me to sign up for like Tupperware or something, because I get, you know, so many of these multi-level marketing things. But there was a lot of interest in this, and I had the anticipation that 4 would be something that, at least early on, I mean, it's still, you know, we've still got a long way to go.
It's moved dramatically, you know, just since the last 2 updates.
So and again, you don't, you know, depending on what parishes are here and there, but I would think that 4. And all these sort of economic ones should have see more favorable votes to them.
All right, we're about 1 minute away from joining our television audience, so I want to at least pause a little bit on the discussion of the amendments, though I do want to get back to them a little bit, especially considering just the way these amendments are written. Something that I noticed whenever I went out to vote, a lot of the reason, at least whenever early voting started, I don't know how much this might have changed, was that the line was moving a little bit slow because people that were coming in to vote hadn't read those amendments ahead of time, so they were reading them for the first time there at the ballot box. And I mean, you saw me just read it. It's a word salad. I mean,
sometimes hieroglyphics would better explain what these amendments do.
All right, well, we're just now joining our television audience. Want to welcome you all back to our special coverage of election night here on NBC 10 and Fox 14. We've had some riveting discussion with our panelists, State Representative Michael Eccles and ULM Political Science Professor Dr. John Sutherland. Going to be talking about a little bit of the results that we're getting here this evening. Obviously, in the president's race, Louisiana and Arkansas being called for President Trump. In the Arkansas Senate race, Tom Cotton appearing to hold on to that handily, and in I lost the district there. District 4 of Congress in the state of Arkansas, you have incumbent Representative Bruce Westerman also holding on to that seat quite handily as well. Moving over to some of our races here in Louisiana, in the race for Senate, Bill Cassidy with very early lead, 63% support of the vote here in the 4th Congressional District, or excuse me, right next door in the 4th Congressional District, Mike Johnson holding on to a lead with 61% of the support of the vote. In the 5th Congressional District over here, a very interesting contest of folks. You have a wealth of people competing. Luke Letlow holding on to a lead with 43% of the vote. And as we were discussing on our digital channel, guys, it would be a very big deal in such a wide pool of candidates for one person to go ahead and emerge as a victor tonight. And you guys can speak. Y'all are open.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, but you know, you've got 16 of 24 parishes with absentee voting coming in, 1 of 800 plus precincts. So a lot more data to come in. But just as that litmus test to come in with such a large percentage of the vote, it's very interesting. The numbers just updated again, and Candy Christopher is at 15% in the 5th congressional race. Luke Letlow at 43% with 24,000 votes. Still tens of thousands of votes out, but an interesting layout right now.
Yeah, and you know, the difference too for this district, unlike say Cedric's in the bottom half of the state, is that you don't have this mega, you know, source of votes that are going to come in at the last minute. You know, Orleans Parish is notorious for coming in very, very late, sort of last minute. Here you've got basically 2 population centers. You've got Monroe and Alec, and that's it. The Florida parishes have been, for the most part, very much managed by Letlow, and evidence is being seen here tonight.
All right, guys. Well, we have a lot more discussion to break down on our digital channel. You can join us on myarklamiss.com. But now let's get back to the national results around the nation. All right, we are now rejoining our digital audience. Like I was mentioning earlier on the issue of the amendment, Amendment 4, still showing a strong lack of support, 55% voting no so far. With the language of these amendments, does that throw off the average voter?
Well, no, I would say that the amendments that are behind right now have had concerted efforts to defeat them. Now, I don't know if that's, you know, groups from outside the state or someone from Baton Rouge trying to influence this thing, but right now you're seeing 2 handily being beaten, and then the others all coming in at the 55 to 60 some odd % range. You go up to amendment number 1, in the early numbers, 70%. Now there's been a concerted effort in the religious community, TV programs, money from out of state. I mean, millions of dollars being spent on this. So it's strongly coming in at 69% with, you know, 250,000 votes, but you still have 2 million votes sitting out there.
Well, and to your point, even further on this, when you look at the early voting that has come in, typically the early and absentee voting is going to be a sort of, I wouldn't say monolithic, but certainly a view on this. However, when you're talking about day of, a lot of the day of, as we've seen a lot of effort in terms of text, mail-outs, radio spots, I mean, you name it, on things like 4, on all the economic, the budget stabilization, the endeavor, you know, the pilot renewals and that sort of thing. I think what you're looking at, you still got roughly almost 4,000 precincts across the state that we haven't seen anything. So unlike being able to call Virginia, you know, based upon Graves Mountain voting, I think we can sort of hold our enthusiasm a little bit one way or the other to see some more numbers coming in.
And just in from different news sources, but that Democrats would continue to maintain control of the House is what they're projecting, which is not a surprise.
Yeah, not
that
a surprise.
Was kind of expected. In fact, a pickup of anywhere from 5 to 15 seats was even an expectation.
Typically what you find is in the off years, so like 2018, any incumbent is going to lose votes in the House. It's just, it typically is that way. And so for a re-election like we're seeing here in 2020, you probably could have made the argument that it's amazing that Trump didn't lose 28 to 40 seats as sort of a national average over time. And so, you know, you have to put things in perspective. Sometimes we can get so focused on something very small and miss the fact that, you know, historically, he could have lost 28 to 50, you know, 40 votes in the House, and that would have been considered a good year. The real issue to me, though, in terms of the legislative, is will Republicans maintain control of the Senate?
Yeah.
And what we're seeing so far is that they may lose 1, possibly 2 seats, but it's not that wholesale changeover. And remember, not to give too big of a lesson here, because of closure, you need 60 votes in the Senate to get anything done.
Yeah.
And if you don't have 60 votes, you know.
That's right where I was about to take this is
well,
with the House holding on,
alike, Brody.
maybe, I don't know. With the House holding on to its majority, you may not see a blue Senate. You may still see a red Senate, but what we've been seeing right now, and what I think a lot of Americans would say, is that you're not seeing those two houses work together quite well. It hasn't been working. If it's in the hopes of getting a new person in the White House and just holding out for that, that could be a possibility, waiting for the Senate to turn blue. If those two things don't happen tonight, we still need a Congress that can work together with each other. We're already seeing the Senate Republicans, we're not sure if they're going to hold on to a lead tonight. We already know they've lost 1 seat in Colorado. If that majority is slim, no matter which party it is, are we going to see an improvement of relationships, or are we going to see even more division? I mean, that could be a golden question. I mean, anything could happen.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Representative.
Toss that one back over to you.
For being so generous here. Look, there is an argument to be made that divided government is actually the best government because it keeps the government from getting as big and as expansive as it should be.
Financial markets love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Wall Street, Main Street, I think, really love it. Why? It forces consensus, and it does provide a check on the system. You know, I'm one of these people that believe that a smaller government is facilitated by divided government. Because, look, if you've got a Democrat White House, Democrat House, Senate, what's the check on anything, regardless of the merits of it? What is the check on it? The Supreme Court? Well, that's going to take an entire process and does require an actual case being put together. They don't rule on the speculative. So it becomes, you know, there's something to be said for it. Could it, in fact, enhance the ability to get along? Man, I sure wish that was true. I do think that we're in an era of such bitter partisan politics that the idea of consensus building, you know, you just don't find that person ready to step across the aisle as much as say you did. You know, you always know when you're getting old when you say, well, back when I was a kid. Well, back when I was a kid, you know, the Speaker of the House, Thomas Tip O'Neill, and President Reagan would fight, you know, like demons on acid throughout the day and go have a beer, okay, down at Frank's, right down from the White House, and toast and cheer and then fight the next day. But there was a respect.
I don't see Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump having a beer anytime soon.
Or shots, Jello shots.
Well, you even saw President Obama and Speaker Boehner had a decent relationship, and that was how many years now?
Though that was the thing. It didn't last, and I think that a lot of young people miss out on what that consensus
and see, I bring that up because what you're talking about with Reagan, I wasn't even alive yet. You
see the insults that I get, even off, you know, online, just it's terrible, Bodie. But go ahead.
It's your age and level of expertise. You'll far surpass all of our knowledge.
And so, but you're seeing a younger generation of folks who's seeing such a strongly divided government at each other's throats, and you're seeing how that trickles down into society. People at each other's throats over political polarization. I mean, what effect can that have? I would continue
to go back several years ago when the House, the Senate, and the President were all aligned with Democrats, and you passed the ACA.
Yes.
And read it later, pass it now. And then you start getting these back and forths between the pendulum swinging, creating some political animosities and creating an opportunity for a candidate like a President Trump to pop up and become a national figure and be relevant in a period of uncertainty. So I would say this started some years ago. You go back to the Reagans, the Clintons, these were great politicians that worked across the aisle. Now it's become so partisan, you really are not accomplishing as much as you could.
And you make a good point there about the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act in many ways spelled the end of the idea of a conservative Southern Democrat. And the casualty of it, I think in many ways, is that it polarized us on a national level in ways there was an opportunity to build a consensus. But here's the thing, and this isn't pointing fingers. This is when you're in power and you've come in and you've swept the House, you've swept the Senate, you've been elected. The natural thing to think is, hey, everybody likes, everybody's supportive. There was no reason for President Obama to reach a consensus. The consensus was found in the fact that he had done so well in the polls. Same in the House and Senate. I think the missed opportunity, there was at least two areas where I think Affordable Care Act could have been modified, that you could have brought in enough Republicans, I think specifically on tort reform and the ability to buy insurance across state lines. Those two things right there could have smoothed made a better transition for it. And of course, dealing with pre-existing conditions. And I think you could have had something a little bit better. But remember, when Social Security was passed in 1933, and I wasn't alive, but in 1933, Social Security, it was modified and continues to be modified even to this day. I think what we're likely to see, continuous modification with the Affordable Care Act, to the point that 10 years from now, we don't even recognize it. The same way with Social Security. For sure. By the time World War II was over, we didn't even recognize what it was compared to what it had been passed in 1933. So,
you brought up earlier stock markets, and I only want to focus on the issue of stock markets very briefly, just because there is a long-held belief that stocks affect the outcome of the presidential race. And I just want to get both of your opinions on that. A belief that if stocks are trending upwards in the weeks leading up to the presidential race, more than likely you're going to see an incumbent reelected. For the most part, that has been true. Last week may have been an exception in the stock market. So but also you're seeing a lot of, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, a lot of what you could say democratic baskets of stocks in technology, in even marijuana stocks get a lot of support right now, showing a possible Biden win. So with these two different indicators, what do you make of that? Or should we even be paying attention to the stock market in this race?
So I think if you go back 2 weeks ago, and just in the short term, you saw about a 5 or 6% sell-off, which if you looked at the odds makers in Vegas, we're going back to the sports betting, but the odds makers had Joe Biden with a significant lead. As everything started to tighten up and the odds makers, actually put where President Trump was within a stone throw of Joe Biden, in the last 2 or 3 days, you've seen a 3 to 4% run back of the stock market. So, if you're just reading tea leaves, it says, okay, a week or so ago, things might have not been in President Trump's favor. There's a bit of a sell-off. Now that things are moving back in the other direction, you throw an earnings season on top of that, which there are companies out there that are having success right now. I would say that what markets like is to be able to manage expectations. Once a race is settled, I think you'll see the stock market, no matter who the winner is, normalize, and then you'll see the winners and losers start to pop out. But markets like certainty. Post-election is certainty. Things will get back on track then.
I think one of the things too about this, and this is a great teaching moment for me, I have to put on the professorial hat sometimes. We refer to it as a spurious relationship. The idea that you can find correlation but not causation. And is it the markets influencing, or is it really the presidential cycle influencing and providing some stability to the process? You can find a range of these sort of statistically significant anomalies that seem to indicate something. Whenever the American League wins the World Series, whether or not an American League football team. I mean, a whole range of these things that are out there. However, I think what you find with the markets, and this cuts across, the idea that markets favor a particular party, I don't believe that at all. I believe what you find is markets want stability. They want certainty. Because at the end of the day, whether you got a Democrat, Republican, it makes no difference. Your goal is to sell widgets, to sell services, to make money, to reward your shareholders for it. And that's something that is more important than really the politics around it. I think Wall Street, in many ways, is a very good indicator of things.
Markets will balance themselves out.
That's right.
I think you look at, you know, if you're pro-President Trump, that's probably a more financials benefactor, technology, a Joe Biden benefactor. So who's to say one will balance out the other once you get the certainty post-election?
All right, gentlemen, well, we're just about to wrap up our special digital coverage of election night. It has flown right by. And just before we end things here, I want to let both of you make your own closing thoughts on the night thus far.
Go ahead. You're an elected official. I'm just a mere professor.
It's such an early night so far on our statewide races, but you know, some of the numbers I wouldn't say are surprising. It has been a wonderful opportunity though to analyze things before we actually have great data. You as a professor like to look at the entire picture, I understand, but I would expect tonight to be quite close of a race for the presidential race nationwide, and then as a state, we're going to see, I hope, a surprise or two.
I think that one of the things that I'll continue to track throughout the evening is the various amendments and how those will flesh out parish by parish. The other thing that I'll want to look into is, and this is again that sort of research professor side of me, is there a correlation between those parishes that were in favor of particular amendments and whether or not they supported sports betting? So for example, if you want more fiscal control, are you likely to support that? I mean, there's a lot of those kinds of scenarios, but you know, one of the things I've learned about predicting is that after all the elections are over and all the numbers are in, I am very good at predicting.
You really nail that one down.
Oh no, I nail it. I am almost 100%. You know, not quite 100%, but pretty close.
All right, gentlemen, well, that's it for special coverage of election night here on myarklamiss.com. I want to thank our panelists so much for their time, State Representative Michael Echols and Professor of Political Science at ULM, Dr. John Sutherland.